There is a new thing afoot that isn't quite so new, and I want to chat with you a little bit about it. It's not quite so new because it's reminiscent of something that happened about 12 to 15 years ago. If you were around then, you might remember a thing called the so-called Toronto Blessing, or the so-called Brownsville Revival, or the so-called Laughing Revival. These were all linked, the same kind of enterprise going on in different geographic locations around North America, starting in Toronto. And it was kind of it was purported to be a revival. And the Holy Spirit descended, and there were manifestations that of the Holy Spirit, supernatural manifestations. In this particular case, those manifestations were wild laughter, rolling in the aisles, eventually barking and making animal noises and the like. And this came to be quite popular, and it, like I said, it spread around the country, and quite controversial, actually, at the same time, because, as you can imagine, you have good Christians who are interested in being open to whatever the Holy Spirit is doing, yet at the same time, they are wanting to be careful as well. And so consequently, there was quite a bit of controversy. And during that time, I talked about my views on the thing and how we could kind of assess these kinds of things, or how do we respond to these things as followers of Christ, especially in a way that keeps us protected from lunacy or craziness or error, but also kind of keeps us in touch with the Lord. And that's not always easy to do when it seems like every time you turn around, some new enterprise is coming down the pike. And what I said at the time is that whenever I face a difficult theological challenge or problem, what I try to do is I try to start with what I know first, and use that to kind of organize the field, to eliminate certain options, to clarify my task, if you will, and then move from the known to the unknown. And it may turn out that I don't know the answer to a challenge or an issue or something that comes up. But I can, in trying to help someone else on the issue, or even for my own purposes, I can narrow the field a little bit and eliminate some things. And this is what I did at the time with the so-called, and I say so-called because I'm not willing to acknowledge, even now, some 15 years later, that this was a bona fide revival. But certainly people called it that. The Laughing Revival, the Toronto Blessing, the Brownsville, that would be Brownsville, Florida, I guess, revival. Now in Lakeland, Florida, I guess within the last 4 or 5, 6 months, a new enterprise has sprung up called the Lakeland, Florida Revival. The main focus is on the main character leading this enterprise. His name is Todd Bentley, and he's with Fresh Fire Ministries. Apparently been traveling the world with them, but he's you can go to YouTube and you can see clips of him. Kind of a big husky guy with head shaved and big arms and tattoos and earrings and T-shirt. And I don't care about all that stuff. I mean, I don't care if people have tattoos or earrings or whatever. They can look really bizarre as far as I'm concerned. That doesn't disqualify them from consideration. However, there are dramatic events going on here. Some claim many healings, and people come to the Lord, and there's a lot of money collected, and apparently there's some question as to whether Todd Bentley's tattoos are new or not, and I think there's some not so distant photos or videos of him, and he doesn't have all that stuff. And you wonder if there's just a little bit of biker quiche going on here. I don't know. A little bit of showmanship. I mean, that makes me wonder. But this sounds like a return to that same kind of thing that we dealt with 15 years ago. And I want to pass on some information to you now that I passed on to people then, because I think the same principles that I've offered at that particular point will serve us in good stead now, because the principles I offered then were based on something that was written 2,000 years ago, And that which is written 2,000 years ago hasn't changed in the last 10 years. And so it still applies even to this circumstance. Now, part of what you have to do when you deal with alleged new movements of the Spirit is you have to kind of clear away the bad arguments. And I went to the internet and I checked out some things on this Todd Bentley and people's responses to things that were written about it. And there were a whole lot of people that were just critical, I think, simply because there was apparently or allegedly a supernatural manifestation of the Holy Spirit. Now, a lot of Christians aren't comfortable with that. Whenever somebody talks about seeing angels, as Bentley does, or healings or resurrections even, and they talk about it there too. I don't know that there's been any resurrections at their events, but they have a place on their website that talks about those things. We hear those things and we're immediately dismissive, and I think that's a mistake. Just because it's odd, just because it's supernatural, just because it's out of our experience doesn't mean that we should just dismiss it. And we have to, I think, guard against that. Now, it's fair for us to be critical. It's fair for us to say, well, look, the burden of proof is on the other guy to prove these remarkable claims. Nothing wrong with that. But nothing wrong with that. But we want to be careful that we don't have this knee-jerk reaction on the one side. On the other side is another type of knee-jerk reaction. If it looks miraculous, if it looks spiritual, it is. And therefore, anybody complaining about it must be out of step with God. And so I read this morning some silly stuff like, in the face of criticism against these things, in some cases, I think legitimate criticism, there were people who responded in the comment section of the blog or the article or whatever it was. Well, whenever God's Spirit moves, you're always going to have opposition. And that opposition is going to come from within the church. And so what these people are thinking is, if there is an alleged movement of the Spirit and somebody opposes that thing, and that person is inside the church, that's proof to them that this must be legitimate. Well, maybe the opposition is the thing that's legitimate in this particular case.